I want to talk today again about the executive order that Donald Trump issued, putting a temporary hold on immigration from 7 countries in the Middle East. Specifically, I want to talk about the legality of it and all the judicial backlash that we have seen over the past several weeks. So this all started on January 27th when all visas from the 7 countries were revoked. Of course, there was a system put in place that could provide a case-by-case review. Now, almost immediately after that, you saw protests erupt. You saw temporary restraining orders that bar the enforcement of major parts of the executive order being issued by certain judicial courts. And this movement is being spearheaded by things like the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, and the Council on American Islamic Relations. Big surprise there. Now, from a more legal standpoint, the states of Washington and Minnesota seem to be leading this movement. In fact, 15 Democratic state attorney generals released a joint statement saying the executive order is unconstitutional and un-American and illegal and all this other stuff. This all culminated to a climax when Sally Yates, who was acting as the attorney general appointed by Obama temporarily, comes out and says that people shouldn't necessarily have the authority to enforce this law. She says it was unconstitutional, and this is going against her job description. She is there to enforce the laws of the executive branch. Instead, she was doing the very opposite. She was encouraging the judicial system of the United States to disregard this executive order altogether. So she was promptly fired, and rightfully so, by Donald Trump and was replaced by Dana Boente, who became the acting attorney general for a few days there. Now, immediately she became a martyr for the left. Oh, this brave woman that stood up to racist Donald Trump. But really, she knew exactly what she was doing. She became a martyr in her own doing. She knew that she was only acting as Attorney General for a few days until Jeff Sessions, of course, could be initiated as the Attorney General. So she wanted to go out with a bang and score some political points. She knew she wasn't going to have the job much longer, so why would she care if Donald Trump fired her? She knew she was going to get fired before she came out and said this. She did it for purely political reasons, and this highlights the fact that any sort of judicial review of this executive order has almost no ground in any actual lawful statements within the Constitution or within statutory legislation. This is all political, and she knew that, and she became a martyr because she chose to become a martyr for the left. So let me actually talk a little bit about some of the legal challenges brought forth by mainly the state of Washington and Minnesota. There are 2 main umbrellas that the legal challenges come from. Number 1, constitutional, number 2, statutory. So let's first talk about the constitutional arguments, and the main ones there are the procedural due cause and equal protection clauses, which are guaranteed by the 5th and 14th Amendment respectively. And basically, these together say that the government cannot relieve a person, be that person a citizen, a permanent resident, an alien, or any other sort of person within the boundaries of the United States. The government cannot deny them their life, liberty, or property without due notice or opportunity to be heard. Now, this is actually justifiable for some of those people that were stuck in airports, because, again, within the boundaries of the United States, those rights are given. So technically, under the Constitution, at least the people that were stuck in the airports did have some sort of right to procedural due cause and equal protection. This, of course, does not extend to anybody overseas. Syrian nationals, Iraqis, Iranians, any of those people do not have constitutional rights unless they are within the boundaries of the United States and are not deemed to be an enemy combatant. One of the district judges, I think her name was Leonie Brinkema or something like that, she stated that custom officials should actually allow lawyers to go and have access to the legal permanent residents that were being detained in airports. And I will agree to that. I've said it multiple times now. But this should have all been taken care of by now. Give the people that were in the airports legal right if they choose to have it, and review their case on a case-by-case basis. And boom, done with it. That's it. That's all they get. People overseas do not have those constitutional rights, so to challenge the executive order on constitutional grounds makes no sense, except for those people that were already here within the boundaries of the United States. Now, the second constitutional argument that gets made falls under the First Amendment and freedom of religion. If you read the executive action, you know that it says nothing about Muslims, it says nothing about Islam. I will, however, concede that it does indirectly reference religion in one of the clauses. I think it says something along the lines that we should prioritize refugee claims by people based on religious persecution, given that their religion is a minority religion within the country of nationality. So yes, while it does not explicitly say that we should prioritize Christianity, it does indirectly imply that. Now, I do need to point out the glaring hypocrisy of the people that make this argument. These are the same people that are standing up with signs of Anne Frank's face. I don't know if you've seen these. They've been on the news recently. but they'll say that this is terrible what we're doing by barring immigration from these places, because Anne Frank, when she was trying to flee religious persecution, she was actually barred from entering the United States, so it's the same thing. So when you say that you don't necessarily agree with prioritizing people from a religious minority coming into the United States, you can't stand out there with an Anne Frank sign, because it's the same thing. If you think that Christians are not persecuted in the areas that are targeted by this executive order, you are surely mistaken. You're absolutely crazy. If you're going to claim that people that are facing religious persecution should be granted refugee status, then you have to consider that Christianity is in fact a religious minority that is being persecuted in the Middle East. If you don't think so, I dare you to go over to Syria. Just take a family trip, take your whole family with you, and go stand in a Syrian street corner and hold up a cross. Just do that. Just do that, and tell me how long it takes before you yourself are being crucified. I want to know. I want to know how long it's going to take for you standing in a Syrian street corner to become crucified. I'll tell you what, you take your family, you go do your family vacation in Syria, and when you resurrect 3 days later after your crucifixion, come back and tell me how long it took before you were martyred, before you were killed for your religion, and before they made a propaganda video about you. Now, if you want to make the argument that the Constitution, under procedural due cause and protection clauses and freedom of religion, makes an argument against this executive action, I will say that the wording within the executive action very cleverly circumvents these problems. Again, it doesn't necessarily discriminate against anyone on the basis of religion. It uses the terms of religious minority as opposed to a specific religious group, so it's not discriminating against any particular religion. The other legal grounds in which this order gets challenged is under statutory legislation, mainly the Immigration and Nationality Act, or the INA, which is actually the same act that grants the executive branch the power to enact immigration reform. I think this one's actually worth reading word for word, so give me a second here, let me pull it up. So within that piece of legislation, it says that whenever the president finds that the entry of any aliens or of any class of aliens into the United States will be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may by proclamation and for such period as he deem necessary suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions that he deem to be appropriate. So very clearly that gives ultimate authority to the executive branch to hold immigration from areas that he may deem a national security risk. That is exactly what Donald Trump is doing, and in fact that is only secondary to his main goals of the executive order, which is to establish a proper vetting system before immigration is allowed to run rampant within our country. The problem lies with an amendment that was instituted to this act in 1965 saying that no person shall receive any preference or priority or be discriminated against in the issuance of an immigration visa because of the person's race, sex, nationality, place of birth, or place of residence. This is ultimately a failed amendment because it can be interpreted in such a way that any immigration reform can be construed to be an infringement on a person's race, sex, or nationality. It's ridiculous. Let's say that we're at war with a country and they say that they want to kill us and all their citizens say they want to kill us. If the president wants to place a temporary hold on immigration from that country, under this amendment, he theoretically cannot, because theoretically, it is discriminating based on nationality. So this is a loose interpretation of the law. And that is the problem with any legal challenge to Donald Trump's executive action. These people are not interpreting the law. What they're doing instead is they came up with a conclusion and then they go out and try to find evidence to support that conclusion, which goes against any scientific or legal principle. What they should be doing is gathering evidence to come up with a conclusion. No, they're doing the opposite of that. They already had their conclusion that Donald Trump is a racist, and then they're going to go out and nitpick legislation to try and oppose him. It's absurd. It's absurd. The main lawsuit that has resulted from all of this is the state of Washington and state of Minnesota versus Donald Trump. And of course, the Trump administration challenged this, and the United States courts of appeal for the Ninth Circuit denied. Of course they did. This is mainly spearheaded by Judge James Robert. This guy is a complete fool. He's a Washington federal judge that issued the nationwide temporary restraining order of the executive action. Now, the liberals love this because this guy was appointed by George W. Bush. So to the liberals, it's absolutely hilarious that a Republican appointed judge is standing up to Trump. The same people that thought it was great when George W. Bush was cozying up with Hillary Clinton and coming out against Donald Trump. How pathetic is that? The same people that were protesting the George Bush administration, and rightfully so, might I add, for invading Iraq and creating a total mess in the Middle East, now think that George Bush and anything that he does is great because he's opposing Donald Trump. It's absolutely pathetic. Anyways, this judge actually had some credible rulings to his favor. In fact, he struck down a ban on strip clubs in Seattle, which I think is commendable. Not that I necessarily support strip clubs, but I feel that people should have the freedom to do whatever they want. So I think that was a win under a constitutional term. He again dismissed a lawsuit by phone book companies saying that people couldn't opt out of receiving phone books, which is again completely absurd. So I favored the judge in that decision. But this is the same guy that basically waged war on the Seattle Police Department. The Seattle Police Union was requesting more funding, and instead of providing them that funding, this judge basically called them biased, called them all racist, and even in his ruling said that Black Lives Matter. Oh yeah, great indifferent decision there. Great unbiased judicial decision based on the law. Oh yeah, Black Lives Matter. Let me support a terrorist organization that has openly called for the murdering of all cops. Yeah, great idea there. If you still think that Black Lives Matter is a justified political movement, you are mistaken. They are a domestic terrorist organization. They promote violence. They promote the killing of cops. They fail to denounce violence, all in the name of Black Lives Matter. No, they are a domestic terrorist organization. It's hilarious because their leaders, every month it seems like they're being indicted for one of the worst crimes of humanity. In fact, I think just recently one of them was indicted for having child porn and raping a 10-year-old girl. And just today, another one of their leaders, this is hilarious, another one of their leaders comes out and says that all white people are inferior. They have inferior genetics. And she uses rudimentary genetics to try and explain this. She has absolutely no idea what she's talking about. She's saying that melanin, which is produced in your skin that gives your skin pigmentation, she's saying that it is passed down through a dominant gene, and she's saying that because of that, black people are dominant to white people. She has no idea what she's talking about. Anybody that has taken any basic biology or genetics course understands that the way she equates dominant and recessive genes to superiority is absolutely ridiculous. It's hilarious if you understand it. Not to mention the fact that skin color is not determined by simple Mendelian genetics. She fails to think about things like incomplete dominance, codominance, polygenic traits. Melanin doesn't obey simple Mendelian inheritance patterns, and she thinks she's so intellectually superior to people by stating science, and she doesn't even know what the fuck she's talking about. It's ridiculous. The way she's interpreting science is the equivalent of saying that 3 plus 3 equals 8, because if you horizontally flip a 3 and superimpose it over the other one, it kind of looks like an 8. That is the same logic train that she is following. Just because a gene is dominant doesn't mean that it's good. In fact, there's all sorts of terrible genetic disorders that are inherited in an autosomal dominant fashion. Things like polycystic kidney disease, in which most patients require bilateral kidney transplant at some point in their life or they'll die. Neurofibromatosis, and what about a nice bag of myotonic dystrophy to go with that? Oh yeah, that sounds great. It's a dominant gene that's responsible for that, right? Yeah, dominant is good. Huntington's disease, a terrible neurologic disorder that sees people just dying, usually before the age of 50, a terrible, slow, agonizing, and most of the time undignified death. No, this woman has no idea what the fuck she's talking about, and I'm sorry to get off on a tangent there. So no, this whole judicial challenge to Trump's executive order is nothing more than something done for political gain. And people are trying again to say that they're so much smarter than everybody by saying that Donald Trump doesn't understand elementary checks and balances. They're saying that school kids are better than Donald Trump because he doesn't know anything about checks and balances. But the opposite is true. It is the judicial branch that are imposing their own personal biases and not realizing their place within checks and balances. They're the ones that don't understand what legal authority they have to challenge an executive action. They're the ones that are trying to gain political points instead of operating the government as it was intended by the founding fathers. So no, it's ridiculous. And people are making a lot of money on this. Organizations like the ACLU, they've made millions of dollars over this, over people's ignorance and failure to understand the law. I think last I checked, they've raised over $20 million in a few days. I don't even know what it's at this point. In fact, I'll go ahead and say this to you guys. I'll say this. If you're tired of waking up early every day and going to work from 7 to 5 every morning and giving a large portion of your paycheck to the government, if you want to retire, this is what you should do. Start a GoFundMe page for the Muslim refugees. Yeah, do that, and you'll retire in no time. Say you'll keep a small percentage of donations for administrative purposes, and you'll be rolling in money. When you're making your GoFundMe page, write a paragraph, write a heartfelt plea about how we need to raise money to stop Donald Hitler from gassing all the Muslims. Do that, and you need a real tearjerker picture there to go along with it. You need something like a Muslim woman in a hijab with a single tear rolling down her cheek. So go to Google and search something like raped Muslim woman and try to find a real tearjerker picture. You're gonna have to sift, of course, through hundreds of pictures of women being stoned to death, beheaded, or hanging, because if you accuse someone of rape in most of the countries listed in the executive action, that's what happens to you. You get stoned to death in those countries. So if you're trying to find that perfect image for your GoFundMe page, you might have to scroll through pictures until you find a woman that is crying, not actually being lynched or wearing a burqa or anything, because then you can't see her face if she's wearing a burqa. But yeah, write a paragraph about how Donald Trump is Hitler and we have to help these refugees, and then find a picture of a Muslim woman with a tear rolling down her cheek. Start your GoFundMe page and you'll be rich overnight. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. So no, this is all purely political and has very little basis on any sort of legality. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. I don't even know what to say anymore.